years of diverse supply chain experience to our discussion, including 7 years of management experience leading analyst teams at Gartner and AMR Research, and 15 years leading teams in manufacturing and distribution operations for Clorox, Kraft General Foods, Nestle, Dreyer's Grand Ice Cream, and Procter & Gamble. Welcome, Laura.
Thanks, Amy.
And Stefan Biertzis is a senior manager at Calypso, where he leads the packaging innovation practice. Calypso is a management consulting firm exclusively focused on innovation and product development. Stefan is a packaging innovation thought leader focused on the transformation of packaging design and development capabilities to deliver impactful innovation for his clients. Stefan transforms organizations through process reengineering and application of technology, and is an expert in the management of large-scale business transformation programs. Welcome, Stefan.
Thanks, Amy. Looking forward to today.
Great. So we'll give you a little bit more information on how to contact Laura and Stefan at the end of this webcast. So today's webcast will be about 60 minutes in length, and Laura and Stefan will take your questions for the last 10 minutes. You can use the WebEx chat box to submit your questions at any time during the webcast. We are also tweeting during today's event with the hashtag #PackagingInno, which you can see in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, along with the Twitter handles for Laura and for Stefan. So please share your thoughts and ask your questions on Twitter as well. With that, let's go ahead and get started. Laura?
Well, Amy, this is an exciting topic for me because I actually started my career as a packaging engineer, and so as I've worked with Stefan on this, it's really brought back a lot of memories. And I have a lot of energy around it because, number one, it is a constraint for the larger supply chain, and number two, as we look at organizations, we actually have, over the last 5 years, grown organizations threefold to look at packaging, not only the design and the use of materials, but artwork. And people are struggling with how do we make it better. And so Stefan and I today are going to share insights not only from the research, but also from our experiences about where we are today and how we make it better. So we've got a 4-part presentation. We're first going to go over the demographics of the study and the respondent overview, so you have an idea of who responded quantitatively to the study that we put in the field. Then we're going to ground the teams on packaging and artwork performance, where companies are today, where they feel that they're doing well, and where the gaps are. And then we're going to talk about packaging sustainability because over the last 5 years, from the time that I did my last quantitative study, we've seen a tremendous development around what is packaging sustainability and what it means to packaging processes and the design of packaging. And then we're going to talk a little bit overall about the new product development process and the role of packaging in the new development process. So let's get started. Let's talk about the study, and the study will be available on SlideShare and as well as the recording of this webinar so that you can share freely. We will continue the discussion on our Twitter hashtags below, and we encourage you again to put in your questions in the chat box because it's always better to get questions from the audience. So using Stefan and my networks, we recruited people that we knew that were steeped in the topic of packaging innovation. And the people that filled out the survey, we knew that they are people that do it in everyday jobs. So our goal and our objective was to understand the complexity of packaging design and development and the role of technology in improving packaging and process reliability. We had a hypothesis that packaging had grown more complex and that companies have invested in technology that can address packaging changes faster. We recruited the respondents through our network via email, and we actually were able in this period of June to August to get people, 33 completed respondents, and we worked on what those meant over the last month. Now, when you look at the overall company overview, you can see that most of it came from consumer packaged goods. And our definition is that these are products that have characteristics like household laundry or beauty or over-the-counter drugs was the next topic, which are products that are typically produced by pharmaceutical companies but are over-the-counter drugs, and they have their own specialty issues around packaging. And then food and beverage. So 33% food and beverage, 18% over-the-counter drugs, and 58% consumer packaged goods. And we were looking at, were there any differences by revenue segment? So 39% were 10 billion and above, 33% were 1 billion to 10 billion in revenue, and 18% were less than 1 billion. So this study is a study of large companies by and large, and the average company had 4,000 G10s, which is the GS1 standard for an item. And this was actually a 33% increase over 5 years ago. And you can see the breakout. 52% of companies had more than 5,000 items. So item complexity has grown over the 5 years from when I last did my last study. But branded items versus private label is about the same. 70% of the products that were actually designed for packaging were branded products, meaning that they were owned by the consumer packaged goods company or the food and beverage or the over-the-counter drug company. Now, when we look at the percentage of people dedicated to packaging and artwork, this was actually a surprise for me because the number of people that were reported as really working on packaging artwork creation or management had grown threefold over the course of the last 5 years from the time I had done my last study. And you can see that in the many companies, 23%, they have over 100 people that are working in this area. It's a niche area, but it's an area that's very focused, and a lot of energy goes into it. And they are looking for solutions. They're looking at better processes, and we actually see in the study that we have some unique challenges that I think only a redesign of processes can impact. And Stefan and I are going to talk a little bit about that. The people that responded were managers, so they're very steeped in the process, and you can see that packaging engineering development for new products were 48% of the respondents. And we wanted to look at people across the whole development of the package. So about 45% were working on structural package development, and 21% were working on packaging design and label artwork management. And 33% of the respondents were doing both. And what we wanted to understand was, as the shifts in the business complexity has changed, how has that affected the use of technology and the design of the processes? And one of the things I was happy about in the study was to get people that were very steeped in the process and to be able to look at where we are. So Stefan, one of the things in the study was 5 years ago, the primary goal of people that were in the packaging group was new product launch. And now one of the things we're going to see is that the objectives of global specification management and packaging sustainability priorities have risen up the top of the list. How, in your perspective, has this changed the work, and what do you think this has done to the technology requirements?
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, it has definitely changed. So today's CPG companies are faced with many packaging design and development challenges. Evolving customer and global market compliance requirements, sustainability goals, and improved traceability are a few of the hot topics right now. These pressures are forcing CPG companies to evaluate their packaging design and development capabilities and understand if they're able to effectively compete with their current resources, their tools, and the packaging strategies that they've defined. We will see in survey results that CPG companies are struggling to be effective at meeting the increasingly complex compliance, sustainability, and cost reduction targets. The companies that perform the best are effective because they have invested in defining robust business processes, data management, and specialized technologies that support their packaging strategy. The days of managing packaging design and development with undefined business processes and document-based specifications, they just don't cut it anymore.
Well, and Regina, if we go to the next slide, one of the things that we see on this next slide is that the lack of an established process is one of the largest issues, that the top two barriers that we have in product packaging and artwork development is the lack of an established process and global versus local compliance regulations and requirements. And Stefan, when you were talking about the lack of the established process and the top two barriers here, what do you think here? And, what do people need to do on this process compliance?
So, I mean, it goes back to understanding the business process, right? As the environment has changed, there's more compliance requirements in different markets around the globe, and both local markets and regional markets. And there's also more pressures on sustainability and cost reduction, as well as driving new packaging innovation to stay competitive. As all of those pressures have changed the way that companies need to work. And so taking a hard look at how you currently work today, you have the appropriate processes in place, you have the appropriate quality checks, and then you have the right tools that can enable that business process. And we'll talk a little bit later today also about looking at data management and making sure that your packaging data is structured in a way that you can easily access that data and use that data.
So many people don't have it. If we go to the next slide, Regina, we did a study 5 years ago when I was at AMR Research, and the average time at that point in time for artwork approval was 2 weeks. And, it's a different demographic, and it's hard to compare the studies, and Stefan, I'm sure you'd agree that a lot's changed. But what we see here is that the time for artwork approval is actually increased, not decreased. And, one of the things we're going to see is that we have twice as many companies that have conventional product lifecycle management systems. What do you think? I mean, I know at Calypso, Stefan, you work with a lot of clients, and you focus on artwork approval processes, and you're able to really look at this. But why are we going backwards, not forward? Why is it taking 30% longer?
Well, I think there's a couple reasons, and I've seen it both ways. So I've seen companies that have been able to improve their artwork approval times or development and approval times, and companies that have struggled with that as well. I mean, we've typically seen results of up to 2 to 6-fold increase, or increase in terms of an improvement of artwork development and approval by looking at the business process and putting in the appropriate tools. But I think there's a couple factors that contribute to that. So one is there's an increase in global product launches that require translations and approvals of those artwork files within their home country, within that home country. And this has increased the development time. So there's increasing complexity. And there's different market requirements that have drive the complexity around the approval of artwork. And then there's also, the second thing is there's an increase in the number of new product launches. Right? So you compound the increase in new product launches with increase in cost reductions and increase in compliance and sustainability initiatives, and it just stretches the capacity of the people that are involved in the development, design and development process and the approval of those. So I think this changing environment again I think this changing environment make companies need to look at, do we have the appropriate processes in place? Why are our work approval times increasing? And what are the things that we can do to help to improve those?
So, Stefan, if you think about the 1 or 2 things at the process level that you recommend to clients, what are they? There's anything in particular that sticks out as, people get wrong or process changes they really need to be sure they're looking at?
Well, I think so there's definitely process changes, just making sure you're removing waste in the process. Sometimes there's too many approvals, or the approvals aren't defined well, so it creates different approval cycles where you're going through multiple approvals where it should really only take one, hopefully. But I think even before you get into process is getting the data right. So making sure that the information that you're putting on a label is correct and accurate, and that's coming from a controlled source, rather than having bad data that's going on a label and you don't catch it into the approval process on the actual artwork itself.
I think that's so critical. If we go to the next slide, Regina, one of the things that we see is that compliance with global standards and specifications is really neck and neck now with new product packaging innovation and product launches. And Stefan, when I did this study 5 years ago, it was all about new product innovation. And of course, packaging is going to be about new product and innovation. But the fact that it's really neck and neck now with compliance with global specifications. And, there's also cost reduction projects here, but it's a little bit lower. We didn't see this kind of complexity in packaging artwork 5 years ago. And the other thing, when we look at importance versus performance, Regina, in the next slide, One of the things that we see is the greatest gap in the management of materials and, true packaging innovation, kind of big I. And, I'm working with a lot of clients that are working on new materials, new substrates for sustainability. And, this gap that we see in materials management and how we actually bring that together into market appears to have the largest gap here with 39%. And just to help people with this slide, the purple represents how important is it. And you can see that compliance and new product is very important, but people don't see the kind of gap that they see with materials and packaging and technology innovation with the slide that's on the actual webinar right now. So Stefan, what sticks out to you here around the gap between materials and packaging and the big red flaglets here? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I agree. It's a big red flag. Many CPG companies do not have a good understanding of the materials used as part of their packaging components. If they do, they capture that material information. It's not stored as structured format, but it's rather, and it can't be easily searched and reported against. So packaging engineers need to spend valuable time searching through documents and finding relevant information that they're looking for. Packaging data structure and defining that data structure is very important because it's what allows CPG companies to easily search and report their sustainability information, compliance information, identify the materials used in packaging components when making changes for quality, compliance, and cost reduction purposes. I believe that if companies do not address their packaging data management capabilities, the gaps of the remaining items will begin to increase. So all these other items that you see here will start to increase over time. Compliance and sustainability reporting and identification of cost reduction opportunities is very much a manual process. As these efforts continue to grow, they take away valuable packaging resources that should be used to develop new packaging innovations. So for those of you on the webcast, how can you tell if your data management capabilities are sufficient? And you need to ask yourself a few questions, right? So for example, do you have the ability to search and instantly know all bottles that contain a certain resin type? How easy is it to identify all the items that you source from a potential component supplier? Do you know what products require a child-resistant closure? And then can you easily send SKU, unit pack, case pack, pallet and weight information and dimensions to your customers? Or is this something that's done last minute and manually? So ask yourself those types of questions. Is that data structured? Is it easily available? Or is it something that you actually have to go and search for and take time searching for rather than spending that valuable time to develop new innovative packaging?
And Stefan, in your experience, how many of the clients or percentage can answer those questions?
I think it's increased over time. It's more of a question of how many of these types of questions can you answer. So
okay.
All clients have some capabilities, but when you take a look at defining the data model that supports your packaging design and development processes, you have to look at what's the critical information. So who's the customer of data and what data you need to be able to search and report on. So you may want to know, for example, resins is very important, especially in product contact or food contact materials. You want to know specifically what resin you're using. You want to know sustainability information so you can report against that, both from a corporate perspective but also from a customer perspective. Weights and dimensions are going to be important because your customer is going to need to know that information. So you want to make sure that you know what is the critical information that needs to be structured that you can search on, that you can report against, and what information is not quite as critical. So if you look at companies, it's kind of all over the map. I've been in clients that have 100% paper-based, and anytime they need to find information about sustainability, they're literally searching through hundreds of documents trying to find the right information. And at best, they're fairly accurate in their assessment of their sustainability needs. But other companies, they have this very well mapped out, and they can really hit a button in a tool that they have defined and create some sort of report, or it's integrated into their customers' information systems, and they can send that data to them electronically.
So if we go to the next slide, Stefan, one of the things that I see is that people don't think enough about artwork management, or I think packaging design, as a network. And one of the things that we see in the study, and this has actually increased slightly over the last 5 years, is that, only a small percentage, whether it's 38% of the packaging concepts, or 31% of the graphics, or 39% of the structure or packaging development is actually done inside the enterprise. And that's not going to change that much in terms of as people predict in the next 3 years. And one of the things that I see in my view of working with companies is they don't think enough about this as a network. So the choice of suppliers in terms of what they can bring to the table in structural packaging development or packaging artwork, or the management and sharing of artwork files, or their knowledge about global specifications. And I think that, you know, we need to look at the mapping of this process from end to end, from the people that are doing the artwork to the marketing, design concept companies, to the structural suppliers, to the people that are helping in testing, to really manage it as a network. And that's one of the things that I see that's a gap with the clients that I work with. Now, as we go to the next slide and we look at how do we improve packaging artwork management, you know, this is actually something that surprised me a little bit, Stefan. I mean, we see that, you know, 5 years ago, 29% of companies, similar demographics, had 29% implementation of solutions that are called product lifecycle management, or the technologies that were designed for specification management under PLM. And, you know, Stefan, you and I both know that product lifecycle management, the original design was for discrete companies. And so it was originally designed for platform management and the management of discrete goods. And, you know, the CPG companies have really struggled to make product lifecycle management systems work. But, you know, we see an increase from 29% to 55%, and, you know, so roughly it's doubled, but yet the time has increased 30% to actually manage the cycle. And we're going to see in one of the subsequent slides that the write-offs due to packaging issues have actually increased. And so I was just thinking, Stefan, have we invested in the right stuff, or is it how we've done it? And, you know, what's your insight here?
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's a few factors that contribute to that, and I think, you know, a big part of that is the quality of the system implementations, and really what's the focus of those. And we go to clients all the time, and we work very much with CPG companies that implement PLM solutions, and we've seen very significant improvements in be able to drive innovation, and the ability to get to market faster, the ability to understand their data better. But so I think I would contribute to 3 different factors. So the first one is when they're selecting a system like a PLM or product lifecycle management system in the CPG industry, if they don't take a focus on business process, it can create some issues. So companies focus on implementing systems that they believe will automatically fix their issues, but they don't spend enough effort on reevaluating the business process and identifying where technology should be applied to enable the business process, rather than expecting the technology alone to solve their issue. Focus on defining the business process first with an understanding of the software capabilities so you can maximize the effectiveness of these implementations. So really look at your business process first. Don't just jump into implementing a solution, a technology solution, thinking that's going to solve your issues. You have to look at the business process. If you automate a broken business process, you're just going to get to a bad result faster. You really need to re-engineer that business process first with understanding of how the technology can enable that. The second one is a lack of focus on data structure. So this is what I talked about earlier, making sure that you really understand what the critical pieces of data are and then modeling that in the system. So design a data model during the system implementation. It's just as important as the business process. When implementing technology that enables the package and label development process, you must think about what data you should structure, how you will structure that data, what format it's in, and how that data will be used downstream. So you have to consider who your customers for that data are, right? Is it systems? Is it people? That data end up on a label, and so thinking about that critical data and the format that it needs to be in is very important. And the last thing is companies trying to take on too much or overcomplicating the solution design. I've seen companies try to solve everything at once, the system implementations, and you must consider your company's package design and development maturity level relative to the use of systems like a PLM or a PAM, which I call packaging artwork management solutions. I always recommend developing a clear roadmap that outlines a multi-phase plan that grows capabilities based on alignment to strategic goals and organizational readiness. So make sure you have a plan and don't try to take on too much. It's usually some sort of stepped approach, and as your organization evolves and adopts to change, you can then add additional capabilities through technology.
Well, and if we go to the next slide, so I agree. A lot of clients have put in PLM, right, and they've rushed to put in a technology. They haven't really thought about it. But when we look at open-ended questions from the survey in terms of, what are they doing? It's like, how do we get to end-to-end solutions, and how do I get to that end-to-end workflow? And, I find many times, Stefan, that people say end-to-end, but they don't really define what an end is, and they don't define what another end is, right? And then this concept of real time, right, and, near real time, and what is the value of time, and, the ability to have visualization, so 360-degree rotation, and really being conscious about what is needed in visualization and the selection of the technology. And then, how do we actually share? How do we, we say the word collaboration, but one of the things I see is that people don't think enough about these terms of what is end-to-end, what is visualization, what is sharing, and I see that it gets them in trouble. What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's going back to before you jump in and implement solutions, you need to understand how these solutions can be applied in your industry. So, these are CPG people on the phone today, making sure that these tools that have conventionally been designed for discrete manufacturing can be used in the CPG industry, and they can be. We've successfully done that in the past. And so really understanding that, and what does visualization mean? What does labeling and artwork development mean? What does packaging, data management, and development mean? And understanding how these tools can really help support that network that you talked about earlier, both internally within the company, but also externally with suppliers and design houses, and how they can work together, and really building a true platform that can help drive your innovation goals.
So let's, keep something in focus. Regina, if we go to the next slide, one of the things, where the rubber hits the road, Stefan, is recalls, and sometimes companies have to learn from mistakes, right? They have to stub their toe to move forward. And in this research, we see that 22%, 22% on average of product recalls are related to packaging artwork. And, I can't say the numbers, but a lot of them are really expensive. And it is increased versus decreased versus 5 years ago. And so, to me, Stefan, that just says this is why it matters, right? In terms of, we talk about dirty data, but people are saying, how do I get a definitive ROI? And what I find is that often it's a risk management issue. People have to fail before they can go forward. And so what do you see about this with clients?
Yeah, this is where it hits the bottom line. So if you don't define your process right, you don't remove the gaps in your process, you don't have the data correct, you don't have the appropriate quality checks implemented within the process, then things are going to fall through the cracks. And as complexity increases, there's just going to be more and more of it. So companies need to start taking a hard look at their solutions now and understanding where they need to fill these gaps so this 22% starts to decrease and trends down.
So let's continue. So Regina, next slide. So we've talked about packaging and artwork performance. We've talked about the fact that the cycles actually increased 30%, even though we have double the number of implementations of product lifecycle management. We've talked about that the average write-off on packaging is 22%, and so the panacea is not technology. It really requires, and I thought, your point's brilliant, Stefan, about really mapping the process, being sure that we have streamlining of approvals, and being sure that we've really thought through how we're going to do data. Now we're going to talk about packaging sustainability, which is actually neck and neck with, getting a new product to market in terms of the criteria. And a lot of the clients that I'm working with, are actually working on sustainability, and we didn't see that there was a big gap in terms of where they're at. But, when I have looked at packaging sustainability versus 5 years ago, we see a major, major shift now that, sustainability is growing as a driver in packaging. And I think particularly when we look at, materials and substrates and recycled materials, that, you know, it's driving a new set of parameters here. So 61% of the people in the study say that it's important and that they may still be developing it in 2012 plans, but you know, this is an increase of about 50% in terms of people that have packaging sustainability as their priority since 5 years ago. What do you think, Stefan? Thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is great to see, right? Over half the respondents see sustainability as an important packaging driver in 2012. 5 years ago, at least in the United States, CPG companies were just beginning to seriously consider sustainability as their major packaging initiative. And now an increased importance placed on sustainability, I think it's mostly driven by customer and consumers, has really driven an uptick in the sustainability focus. The interesting thing here, though, is so now there's been a bunch of tools. So if you look at it from a technology perspective as well, there's a bunch of new tools that are coming out that help look at sustainability from a full life cycle perspective, which I think are great. And I think moving forward, a trend is going to be looking at how do we integrate those tools with the core packaging data and specification data that we have to really understand having a truly integrated platform when we manage packaging data.
So when we actually look at this, you know, and the packaging sustainability efforts in the next slide, you know, one of the things that we see is people want to really reduce waste. And I find it ironic that, you know, one of the opportunities for reduction of waste is actually in getting the artwork right and getting the data right. And then, you know, it's energy consumption and looking at natural resources and reclamation. And, you know, reclamation isn't, you know, just let's, you know, do more reclamation. But, you know, they've got to really look, I think, more holistically at packaging design and new materials and, you know, take it seriously. Any insight here, Stefan, about, you know, how do you reduce this packaging waste or get to the low-hanging fruit here?
Yeah, I mean, so reduction in packaging waste is going to be the clear winner here. It's the low-hanging fruit, and it has been for quite some time. The CPG industry has historically overpackaged products to try and differentiate products from the competition. But moving forward, CPG companies need to take a holistic approach to packaging design early on in the development process and incorporate packaging function, material, structure, and sustainability into the design process. So really stepping back and saying, let's make sure we're building sustainability in at the beginning, not thinking that as an afterthought. So a lot of times companies have started to say, well, where can we reduce waste, remove materials just to save costs? But now, as companies develop new products, take a holistic approach of how can we design that in from the get-go up front when we initially introduce a product to the market.
So if we look at the next slide, you know, how we introduce it from the get-go, right? You know, people that are looking at supporting packaging sustainability efforts through new technology. And, you know, one of the things we see is there's a whole range of technologies that people are looking at. And so as they're looking at things like the Walmart scorecard, or they're looking at, you know, perhaps, you know, a new requirement by a new customer, you know, what technologies work, Stefan? What are you seeing in terms of specialized tools that help you with sustainability information? Because it looks like there's a gap there.
Yeah, this is a kind of a new evolving space. As we see 5 years ago, sustainability wasn't as important as it is today. But companies are using, there's different life cycle analysis tools out there that look at sustainability. But, you know, it's all over the map. So companies are using anything from Excel to Compass or some other specialized tools. I believe there's a lot of opportunity for this space to grow and integrate package sustainability tools with what I call the packaging data record, or a single source of the truth for packaging and product data. Sustainability information should not be separated from core packaging data, but it does need to be accessible and easily sent to customers who require sustainability information, such as the Walmart scorecard. So my recommendation is to consider packaging sustainability information as part of your core packaging data, such as packaging specifications, and build sustainability information into your data model when implementing a packaging specification management solution such as PLM.
Yep. And, you know, as we look at the next slide, you know, when we look at it, you know, I think people just aren't thinking about it. You know, when they, you know, they've got a PLM system, maybe they've got a product artwork management system, which I think, Stefan, you call PAM, even though I hate acronyms. And, you know, I just don't think they've thought about, you know, carbon dioxide footprints or, you know, carbon footprints, and, you know, didn't even know that it was a criteria. So if we move on, let's look at the new product development process more holistically. And if we go to the next slide, Regina, one of the things that we see is that, this is not just something that's done in isolation. We talked about on average there are 150 people, but, we've got a lot of collaboration and a lot of requirements for cross-functional. So heavy usage by marketing, packaging engineering and development, of course, creative design and services, and we talked about that about 38% of the artwork management is actually happening in the company, but requires a lot of collaborative work. But also these packaging suppliers, the work with outside-in innovation and the ability to work with it, and also procurement. I kind of like seeing that it's this cross-functional and that people are recognizing it in the study. What do you think, Stefan?
Yeah, I think it's great to see. I mean, but there are a couple things that stuck out at me here. So it's good to see market research involved early in the NPDI process during the concept phase, but it's disappointing to see market research dropping off to only 15% during launch. The best performance test performance of packaging post-launch and in-market to capture lessons learned and apply those lessons to new product launches, new packaging innovations, and packaging redesign. And the second thing is I'm surprised to see that R&D is only involved 58% of the time during the concept phase. This could be indicative of a throw over the wall and package it mentality, where R&D develops a product and then expects packaging to develop a package rather than having an integrated product and packaging design process throughout the NPDI process. And the truly innovative packaging comes from collaboration, and so understanding what a product's going to be and how that's going to be packaged, and building both those in conjunction during the concept phase is very important to having new innovation in packaging.
Well, I think your point around the fall-off of marketing after launch is just a real opportunity for people. And, and I also think, the point around having that collaboration earlier. And as we look at the next slide, and this is not just collaborators, but these are the owners. And one of the things that I find in the definition of the process is the lack of clear ownership, Stefan. I find that, for example, in artwork, where we have a clear owner, we have less waste. And here, where we've got the top owner, do these seem right for you in terms of who's owning it by phase?
Yeah, I think these make sense. There's no really big surprises here. But you bring up a very important topic is the process ownership. So I've talked a lot today about defining the business process, and it's very important to understand who those process owners are that can make decisions when re-engineering your business process. So what I see here from the respondents in terms of who's owning each of these activities during the different phases, those make sense to me. But making sure that that's clearly defined within your organization as you go into this process re-engineering activities is very important to know.
Yeah, and if we move to the next slide, which is really showing the ownership of packaging artwork net new across the phases, right? What we see is kind of these top six that really are in the heat of things. And one of the things that I observe is that people aren't clear on the handoffs, and we haven't necessarily designed the selection of product lifecycle management or artwork management with thinking about that whole network and thinking about who is the owner and where are the handoffs. And, one of the things that I find that's an opportunity for clients is really, really getting clear on this and, sitting and mapping it and don't assume it, because I find that there's a lot of turnover employees and that what it looked like at company X is very different than company Y, and there's a lot of assumptions and a lot of misunderstandings, particularly as we get into global organizations, because when we talk about global, right, every company is defined global differently, and the global regional definition of governance is what I find people stub their toes on here with, what is the role of marketing, which tends to be more corporate, and what is the role of packaging engineering, because we've got a lot of design and development in region, and, the creative services are typically around the world, and, the packaging suppliers. So I find defining ownership and global is really key here. Stefan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the global piece just adds a whole other layer of complexity. And so when you start going global and trying to expand into more global markets, understanding the roles and ownership of the process is going to be very important.
Well, and if we go to the next slide, you know, one of the things that I would love to do is continue the conversation with people on the webinar. You know, we have in our new Supply Chain Insights community the ability for people to come and to continue the conversation, to share information, and, you know, a private group for them to be able to continue the conversation. So I think, you know, it's a wonderful dialogue to continue about, you know, why have we spent money and invested resources on product lifecycle management and product artwork, and we've talked about supplier development, but, you know, global supply chains are tough, and package requirements are growing, and sustainability is evolving, and so I think that it's a topic that needs to have continued discussion. Amy, any questions for us from the audience?
Yes, we do have a few questions. So before we get to those, I just want to remind our audience, if you do have a question you'd like to submit for Laura and Stefan, just use the WebEx chat window or use our Twitter hashtag #PackagingInno on Twitter. We're monitoring that. So we've got a few questions here that people have submitted, so I'll start with those while more questions come in.
Okay.
The first one, I think I'll go ahead and direct to Stefan. What are some of the top mistakes companies make when they implement PLM?
So I think I covered this, but it's really looking at the business process first before implementing a technology solution. So before moving into PLM, make sure that your business process is well defined. But when you do define that business process or redefine that business process, make sure that you consider how the technology can enable that process to improve the process. That's number one. Second one is, remember looking at that key product data, packaging data, and understanding which data needs to be structured within a PLM solution so it can be searchable, reportable, and easily reused. And then the third is making sure you have a clear roadmap and understanding of what capabilities you're going to be implementing and when, and making sure that's aligned to the organizational readiness of your company. You know, there's a lot of capabilities within PLM. Packaging data management is just one of them. Workflows and processes is another. But there's a whole suite of capabilities, both in PLM and other solutions like what I call PAM, or Packaging Artwork Management, which are solutions that help enable the artwork development process. And understanding those before just jumping in and trying to implement a solution is very important.
Yeah, and if I could just add, Amy, you know, I see three issues with the product lifecycle management RFPs that I see. One is people don't think enough about visualization and what is needed for visualization. Two, they don't think enough about the collaborative sharing and the workflows and the handoffs and the ownership, especially on the definition of what is global. And third, they're not thinking about, you know, what does sustainability mean and what do they need to do in terms of data enrichment, and how does that data enrichment, whether it's carbon footprint or whether it's something around active molecule or something around a particular function of the package and the design, how do they incorporate it? And I think it really requires thinking through those specifications first before they go out in the market and look at technology. And so many times I see that people get wined and dined by technology and they haven't really thought about where people stub their toes.
Right, that makes sense. Here's another question that came in around product recalls, which you talked a little bit about. Laura, what's your advice for supply chain leaders that are trying to reduce waste with product recalls?
Well, I think that we've got to not only map the process of how we get a package to market, but also how do we reduce the recalls. And one of the ways that I think we reduce recalls is the use of unstructured data to see how consumers are looking at the package and what the issues are, right? I think about the smelly liners that Kellogg's had last year, right? And, you know, they could have picked that up much faster if they were sensing off of unstructured data and they could have seen the quality issue. The second thing is, I think, mapping the process on the reverse side for all parties. You know, I think Stefan's point about marketing not being involved in post-launch. I think, you know, audits and the ability to look at the functionality of the package and to be able to really focus on that. But thirdly, I think someone who manages artwork, I have a lot of clients that are so frustrated by dirty data and the lack of specification discipline in the launch of products. And I say to them, who owns artwork in your company? And who is the person that, drives the cadence and coordinates and makes sure that we have all of the parties coming together? And they kind of hang their head. I think we need a clear owner, and I think we've got to, in global regional specifications, make sure we define what global is and global regional governance and how we get input about what's happening with specification for our particular molecules or commodities or particular products in the regions. And I find people don't think enough about that. They just say they're global and they think it's going to happen. But regional global governance, I think, is a real missing area.
Stefan, anything to add?
Yeah, I agree with Laura's comments. I think it's well said. I mean, global requirements and changing global requirements are often the cause of missing something on a label, for example. And so having a good understanding of what those requirements are, building into the process checks to make sure that those requirements are being met early on in the development process rather than at the tail end when you're trying to get a rush of product to market is very important.
Okay. Yep, that makes sense.
Amy, anything else?
Yes, I do. I have a couple more.
Okay.
I think we have a few more minutes. So this one is for Stefan. Stefan, are there any new and emerging trends that you see specifically in the CPG packaging industry?
Yeah, there's some new emerging trends that I think are actually going to be really cool in the future. And it has to do with virtualization of packaging at the retail shelf. So early on in the concept phase where you're designing new packaging, whether that's a new graphic, new colors, a new form or function or shape of a packaging, looking at what that looks like at the retail shelf very easily in a virtual environment using software tools rather than trying to build actual physical comps that you put on a shelf somewhere in your creative group. And there's some new technologies that are coming out. They're not widely used at this point in time, but I think that we'll see that as a trend moving forward. And then once that technology evolves, I think using that technology to then test that with consumers rapidly to then have better feedback on should this package be a bottle or should it be a tube, should it be red or should it be blue, and what creates a better shelf pop or what speaks to a consumer at shelf better is going to be some of the new things that are going to be happening over the next few years.
Great. Here's one that just came in on the chat. Could you give some examples of how to manage global versus local governance, how to manage the split?
Well, yeah, I think that you've got to take the collaboration slide that Stefan and I talked about, and you've got to really say what defines global in terms of what is the input of the regions for the product portfolio, what are the inputs from the customers around sustainability and scorecards and the buying decisions, what are the requirements for new product launch, and also the regulations around the brand promise, whether it's organic or free range or usage for over-the-counter drugs or beauty or allergens. And you've really got to look at that map by region and look at where your inputs are coming in from your new product launch. Maybe it's a test kitchen or maybe it's a packaging design center around the world. And talk about, what's global and what's regional. So many companies do design globally, but they execute the specifications regionally, but they've got to have one owner for artwork. But they don't really define who has the ball at what point in time of the process, or they haven't thought about how complicated the processes have gotten. And most of the time I find that companies truly aren't global, they're multinational, and they have different core competencies in different regions. So they may have, very defined capabilities in China because it's a different language, but they kind of go to sleep at the switch on Canada versus the US because it's English, right? And so, I think we've got to think about what are the differences in terms of how we communicate to customers in those languages, what are the specifications, what is the role of the R&D center in that region, and map that out and look at how that changes. And I just find people don't map it out.
Right. And so I agree with that, Laura. The other thing I would add is as companies need to understand the different local market requirements and have those captured somewhere as filters within the development process. And then early on in the process, they need to define that this is a new product that they're launching. Is this going to be a global product, or is this a regional or a local product? And then if it's global, they need to understand that by putting in place those filters and understanding what the local requirements are they just screening for that up front to making sure that they're going to meet those requirements? And if not, or if they can't meet those requirements, kind of breaking those apart from a global product design into individual regional product designs where appropriate.
Great. So let's go ahead and do just one last question, and then we'll sign off. Laura, do you have any advice or leading practices on how to streamline time to market?
Well, I think time to market is best streamlined when we're clear on demand insights, and we are working actively on test and learn. I think our conventional processes around demand insights really need to be rethought, and I think that our time to market can actually also be accelerated around a chief commercialization officer that in the midway and the stage gates helps with the design of the supply chain and the work with suppliers. I also think that open innovation networks, particularly with suppliers, that we really have got to question, how we form those relationships and how we reward suppliers, particularly for packaging, around new ideas and artwork management and how we design that, outside in. And so I think three things: how we listen and use demand insights, which I think social opens up a whole new opportunity. Two, the design of the extended value network and the mapping of these processes, so chief commercialization officer. And three, our formation of relationships around suppliers. That's my thought. Stefan?
Yeah, the one thing that I would add to that is looking not just the conventional way at time to market. Conventionally, companies look at time to market as I have an idea, and now at the end point is the product is launched. But what does that really mean in this global environment? It's not just one launch. There's multiple launches in many different markets around the globe. So many times companies will, let's say, develop something in the U.S. to start, and then they'll then take that and then launch that in the different countries around the globe. So by doing some due diligence up front and some planning that says, here's our roadmap or our plan to launch a new product, not only in the U.S. but in global markets, you can actually launch all those global markets more in a parallel fashion than in a sequential fashion. And so that's where you really get the big benefits of time to market, by entering in different markets around the globe, more parallel rather than sequential.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Laura and Stefan. We are approaching the top of the hour, so I want to thank everybody today for your questions. If we didn't get to your question, we will be sure to follow up with you one-on-one. Today's webcast has been recorded, and the archive webcast will be available on Monday. We'll be sure to email the link to everybody that registered for today's webcast. So on behalf of our speakers, Laura Ciceri of Supply Chain Insights and Stefan Biertzis of Calypso, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and I hope that you have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.